My name is Elena, a 32-year-old paralegal who spent 5 years building my career at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. I poured my heart into that job only to have Richard Maxwell, my boss, betray me when I needed his support most. Little did he know that the non-disclosure agreement he forced all employees to sign would become the very weapon I used against him. The day he fired me and threatened to destroy my career was the day his own empire began to crumble. Before I tell you how I turned my boss's own legal trap against him, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you love stories about corporate justice and sweet legal revenge. I graduated with a pre-law degree from Northwestern University, with dreams of eventually becoming an attorney. However, the financial reality of continuing to law school hit hard after graduation, so I decided to work as a paralegal for a few years to save money and gain experience in the legal field. That's how I ended up at Maxwell & Associates, one of the top corporate law firms in downtown Chicago. The firm occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper with breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. The office screamed money and power from the moment you stepped out of the elevator into the marble-floored reception area. Original artwork hung on the walls, and the conference rooms were named after Supreme Court justices. It was exactly the prestigious environment I had imagined working in during my studies. I'll never forget my first day. I was both nervous and excited as I was led through the maze of offices and cubicles. The firm specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions with a client list featuring Fortune 500 companies and high-profile executives. I felt like I had stepped into the big leagues. Richard Maxwell was the managing partner and the face of the firm. Tall, always impeccably dressed in custom suits, with salt and pepper hair that gave him a distinguished look. He had a reputation as a shark in the courtroom and a genius at negotiating deals. His name regularly appeared in legal journals and business publications. Working for him seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. The person who actually hired me was Marcus Johnson, a senior partner who headed the corporate division. He was in his late 50s with a calm demeanor that balanced Richard's intensity. Marcus took me under his wing, initially showing me the ropes and introducing me to the firm's systems and procedures. "Elena, you have a sharp mind," he told me during my first week. "Just be diligent and observant and you'll go far here." Then there was Stephanie Davis, the human resources director, always dressed in designer clothing with not a hair out of place. She moved through the office with an air of efficiency and coldness. She was clearly loyal to Richard, often functioning more as his personal assistant than an objective HR professional. "The NDA you're signing today is standard procedure," she explained on my first day, sliding the thick document across her desk. "Everyone from the partners to the janitors sign it. Confidentiality is paramount in our business." I barely skimmed the document before signing it, a decision I would later both regret and be thankful for in an unexpected way. My closest ally at the firm became Amelia Parker, another paralegal who started just 6 months before me. She was warm and funny, providing a welcome contrast to the often tense atmosphere of the office. "Just watch your back around Richard," she warned me during our first lunch together. "He's brilliant, but he always looks out for number one." I should have heeded her warning more carefully, but I was eager to prove myself, and Richard's reputation for excellence made me want to learn from him despite the red flags. The final key player in this story is Jackson Wilson, the firm's general counsel. Unlike the flashy presence of Richard, Jackson was quiet and methodical. In his early 60s, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he had been with the firm since its founding. His job was to handle the legal affairs of the firm itself, a role that would become critically important in my story. My first year at Maxwell & Associates was everything I had hoped for professionally. I was assigned to assist on major cases, often working directly with the partners. My background in financial analysis from college proved useful, and I quickly gained a reputation for thorough research and attention to detail. "Elena has a gift for finding the needle in the haystack," Marcus once commented during a staff meeting, which earned me a brief appraising look from Richard. That look should have warned me, because soon after Richard began requesting me specifically for his cases. At first I was flattered. Working directly under the firm's star attorney seemed like the fast track to advancement. The first red flag appeared about 18 months into my time at the firm. I had spent weeks researching precedents for a complex tax structure in a corporate merger. My findings identified a strategy that could save our client millions. I carefully prepared a memo and supporting documentation which I gave to Richard before a client meeting. During the meeting which I attended to take notes, Richard presented my research as his own breakthrough. He didn't acknowledge my contribution at all. The client was impressed and Richard basked in the praise. That was my research, I whispered to Amelia after the meeting. Welcome to Maxwell and Associates, she replied with a knowing look. First time. It wouldn't be the last time. Over the next year, I noticed a pattern. Richard would assign me complex research tasks, use my work to impress clients and partners, and take full credit. When I tried to subtly remind him of my contributions, he would brush it off. We're all part of a team, Elena, he would say dismissively. Individual credit isn't how things work in the real world. Despite these frustrations, I still valued the experience I was gaining. The cases were fascinating and I was learning more about corporate law than I could have imagined. Plus, the salary and benefits were excellent. I told myself it was all part of paying my dues. Then came the Titan Tech merger case, the project that would ultimately change everything. Titan Tech was a major software company looking to acquire a smaller but innovative startup called Quantum Solutions. The deal was valued at over $2 billion, making it the biggest case our firm had handled that year. Richard was, of course, the lead attorney on the case, and he assembled a team of 5 attorneys and 3 paralegals, including me. The pressure was intense from day one. This merger will define our firm's reputation for the next decade, Richard announced in our first team meeting. Nothing less than perfection will be acceptable. What none of us knew then was that this case would indeed define the firm's future, just not in the way Richard had imagined. The first hint of trouble came about 3 weeks into the due diligence process. As I was reviewing financial statements from Quantum Solutions, I noticed some accounting irregularities that seemed designed to inflate the company's value. It wasn't obvious unless you were specifically looking for it, which made me all the more concerned that it was deliberate. This discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to my firing Richard's downfall and my unexpected victory, using the very document he thought would silence me forever. The irregularities I discovered in Quantum Solutions' financial statements weren't just minor discrepancies. After 3 days of digging deeper, I found evidence suggesting the company had been artificially inflating their user growth metrics for at least the past year. For a tech startup being acquired largely because of its growing user base, this was a significant issue that could substantially affect the valuation. I compiled my findings meticulously, creating a comprehensive report with supporting documentation and a clear explanation of the potential impact on the merger. Excited about making such an important discovery, I scheduled a meeting with Richard to present my findings. This could save Titan Tech from a seriously overvalued acquisition, I explained as I laid out the documents on his polished mahogany desk. They're essentially paying for phantom users that don't exist. Richard barely looked at my carefully prepared report. Instead, he leaned back in his leather chair and fixed me with a cold stare. Elena, you were assigned to review standard contract terms, not play detective with their financial statements, he said dismissively. This is why we have financial advisors on the deal. You're overstepping your role. But the financial team missed this, I persisted. Look at the pattern in these quarterly reports. It's subtle, but consistent. That's enough, Richard cut me off sharply. Stay in your lane. We have deadlines to meet, and I need you focused on the tasks you were actually assigned. He slid my report back across the desk without even reading it. The dismissal was humiliating, but I told myself he was under pressure. Maybe he would review it later when he had more time. That evening I stayed late to catch up on my regular assignments. Around 8:30 I headed to the break room for coffee and overheard voices from the large conference room. The door was slightly ajar and I recognized Richard's voice, along with those of several senior partners, including Marcus. The discovery I made about Quantum's user metrics is concerning, Richard was saying. They've been systematically inflating their numbers to drive up the valuation. My heart sank as I realized he was presenting my findings as his own. I stood frozen outside the door, coffee forgotten in my hand. This could reduce the acquisition price by up to 30%, Richard continued. I've prepared a full analysis for our client presentation tomorrow. Excellent work, Richard, came Marcus's voice. This is exactly why Titan Tech hired us. Finding this before the deal closed could save them hundreds of millions. I couldn't bear to listen anymore, and quietly walked back to my office. The betrayal stung even more than previous instances because of the significance of this discovery. This wasn't just a clever legal strategy or an insightful precedent. This could change the entire outcome of a billion-dollar deal. 2 days later, the news spread through the office that Richard had received personal thanks from Titan Tech's CEO and was being awarded a substantial bonus for his diligence and insight. The final insult came when an email announcement from Stephanie praised Richard's exceptional attention to detail in identifying the financial discrepancies. Amelia found me in the file room fighting back tears of frustration. "You made the discovery about the user metrics, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. "You need to stand up for yourself, Elena," she urged. "This is different from the usual credit stealing. This is a major discovery that affected $1 billion deal. You deserve recognition." "What am I supposed to do?" "Go over his head to the senior partners," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "At minimum, you should talk to him directly," Amelia advised. "Make it clear that while you're a team player, this crossed a line." After agonizing over it for days, I finally worked up the courage to confront Richard. I caught him alone in his office late one evening when most of the staff had gone home. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked from his doorway. He gestured for me to enter without looking up from his computer. I wanted to discuss the Quantum Solutions financial discrepancies. I began, my heart pounding. The discovery that saved Titan Tech from overpaying. "What about it?" he asked, finally looking at me with a hint of irritation. "I made that discovery, Richard. I brought it to you and you dismissed it. Then you presented it as your own work to the partners and the client." His expression hardened. "Is that what you think happened?" "It's what did happen," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I have the original report with the timestamp showing when I created it and when I presented it to you." Richard's demeanor changed instantly. His face flushed with anger as he slowly stood up from his desk. "Let me make something perfectly clear, Elena," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Every piece of work you do at this firm belongs to the firm, and by extension to me as your supervising partner. There is no your discovery or my discovery. There are firm resources being deployed for client outcomes. That doesn't mean you can take sole credit for work you initially dismissed," I countered, though my confidence was wavering under his intense glare. "Careful," he warned. "May I remind you of the non-disclosure agreement you signed when you joined us? Section 8 specifically addresses internal firm communications and attribution of work. I could make it very difficult for you to find employment anywhere in the legal field in this city if you start making accusations about credit stealing." The threat hung in the air between us. I hadn't expected him to immediately invoke the NDA as a weapon. "I'm not making accusations outside the firm," I said. "I'm having a private conversation with you about professional courtesy." "And I'm reminding you of your contractual obligations," he replied coldly. "Your career is just beginning, Elena. Don't torpedo it by developing a reputation as difficult to work with, or worse, as someone who doesn't understand the confidential nature of law firm operations." I left his office feeling both angry and afraid. The implication was clear: speak up, and he would use the NDA to damage my reputation and possibly pursue legal action against me. As a paralegal without the financial resources to fight a protracted legal battle against a powerful law firm, the threat was effective. That night, I seriously considered quitting. But jobs at prestigious firms were competitive, and having only 2 years of experience meant I would likely take a significant step down in both responsibility and pay if I left now. The confrontation with Richard left me in a difficult position. I needed the job, but I had also made an enemy of the firm's most powerful partner. I just didn't realize yet how vindictive he could be, or how this conflict would escalate into a battle that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Following our confrontation, Richard's attitude toward me changed dramatically. Gone was any pretense of mentorship or collegiality. Instead, he seemed determined to make my work life as difficult as possible. The first sign came when I was removed from the Titan Tech case without explanation. Instead, I was assigned to mundane contract reviews and document organization tasks well below my skill level. When new interesting cases came in, other paralegals were assigned to them while I was consistently overlooked. "He's trying to bore you into quitting," Amelia observed during lunch one day. "Classic tactic." He doesn't want to fire you because that would require documentation and justification, but he can make you miserable enough to leave voluntarily. Well, it's working, I admitted. I spent 4 hours yesterday alphabetizing client files from 2010. It's soul-crushing. The office dynamics shifted as well. Colleagues who had previously been friendly became distant, clearly aware that I had somehow fallen out of favor with Richard. I was excluded from team meetings and social gatherings. Even Marcus, who had initially been supportive now, barely acknowledged me in the hallways. Despite Richard's efforts to sideline me, I maintained my professionalism and continued to do whatever work was assigned to me with diligence. I was determined not to give him legitimate grounds for termination. If I was going to leave, it would be on my terms with another job already lined up. About 2 months after our confrontation, an unexpected opportunity arose. Due to a sudden illness, the paralegal assigned to the next phase of the Titan Tech merger was out for 2 weeks. With deadlines approaching and no one else available who was familiar with the case, I was temporarily reassigned to assist. Richard was clearly unhappy about this, but had little choice given the timeline pressures. Just stick to the assigned tasks, he warned me coldly. Nothing more. Nothing less. I threw myself back into the work, grateful for the chance to engage with a meaningful case again. As I reviewed the latest acquisition documents, I noticed something concerning. Certain key disclosures about Quantum Solutions technology patents were worded in a deliberately vague manner that obscured potential limitations. Further research confirmed my suspicions. Quantum's primary patent had a significant challenge pending that could substantially impact its validity. This information was technically included in the disclosure documents, but phrased in such convoluted legal language that it was effectively hidden. This discovery presented me with a dilemma. After what happened last time, taking this information to Richard seemed foolish. He would either dismiss it again or steal the credit. But saying nothing could potentially harm Titan Tech, our client, who was paying millions for our firm to protect their interests. I decided to document everything meticulously while considering my options. I created a separate private folder on my personal laptop where I kept copies of all relevant documents and my analysis careful to remove any client-identifying information to avoid violating confidentiality rules. As I was deliberating what to do with this information, I was called into a meeting with Stephanie from HR. Her office was smaller than the partners, but no less intimidating with its view of the Chicago skyline and minimalist modern furniture. "Elena, please sit down," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is just an informal check-in." I knew immediately that wasn't true. There was nothing informal about HR meetings at Maxwell and Associates. "There have been some concerns about your attitude recently," Stephanie continued, glancing down at a file on her desk. "Several partners have noted that you seem unhappy, and there have been comments about you questioning assignments or overstepping your role." "That's not accurate," I replied carefully. "I've completed all assignments as directed. If anyone has specific examples of unprofessional behavior, I'd appreciate hearing them so I can address any misunderstandings." "This isn't a formal complaint, Elena, just feedback," Stephanie said dismissively. "But I should remind you that paralegals are expected to maintain a positive attitude and support the partners without questioning their judgment. Richard in particular has mentioned that you seem to have difficulty accepting the hierarchy of the firm." It was clear this meeting had one purpose: to build a paper trail that could later justify my termination. Richard was moving from trying to make me quit to actively working to fire me. "I understand the hierarchy perfectly," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I've always conducted myself professionally. If Richard has specific concerns about my work, I'm happy to discuss them directly with him." Stephanie's smile tightened. "That won't be necessary. Consider this a friendly warning. Focus on your assigned tasks, maintain a positive attitude, and everything will be fine." We both knew that was a lie. Nothing would be fine as long as Richard wanted me gone. After the meeting, I went straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and tried to calm my racing heart. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated. I needed to protect myself. That evening, I pulled out my employment contract and the NDA, reading them carefully for the first time since I signed them. The NDA was particularly daunting, full of legal jargon designed to intimidate. But as I read through it methodically, section by section, I noticed something interesting in paragraph 12b, the indemnity clause. The language was complex, but essentially it created mutual protection in cases where disclosure was required by law or where concealment would constitute participation in unethical conduct. It was a standard whistleblower protection provision, but with unusually broad wording in our version. I wasn't sure if this would be relevant to my situation, but I made note of it anyway. Then I called Darren, a friend from college who had gone on to become an employment attorney at a different firm. I need some advice, but this has to be completely confidential. I told him when we met for coffee on the weekend. Always, he promised. Attorney-client privilege, even though we're friends. I explained the situation without naming the firm or individuals involved, detailing Richard's credit, stealing, the subsequent retaliation, and my recent discovery about the patent issues. You're in a tough spot, Darren acknowledged. These types of situations rarely end well for the employee, especially against a powerful partner at a prestigious firm. So what are my options, I asked. Document everything. Save emails. Keep a detailed journal of incidents with dates and times. Forward work emails to your personal account if they provide evidence of your contributions or the retaliation, he advised. And start looking for another job immediately. What about the NDA? He's threatened to use it against me if I speak up. Without seeing the specific language, it's hard to give definitive advice, but most NDAs have limitations and exceptions. They can't legally prevent you from reporting illegal activity, for instance. I didn't tell Darren about paragraph 12b yet. I wanted to research it more thoroughly myself before bringing it up. Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to deteriorate. My assignments became increasingly menial, and Richard began criticizing my work in front of colleagues for minor issues or even invented problems. It was clear he was building a case for poor performance. Meanwhile, I continued my private investigation into the patent issue and discovered even more concerning information. Not only was the patent being challenged, but there was evidence suggesting Richard and one of the Quantum Solutions executives had discussed this issue directly. Yet it remained obscured in the disclosure documents. This went beyond taking credit for someone else's work. This was potentially facilitating fraud by allowing material information to be effectively hidden from our client. I knew I needed to act despite the personal risk. I prepared a detailed report for Marcus and the other senior partners, documenting the patent issues and their potential impact on the merger. I planned to submit it directly to them, bypassing Richard entirely. The night before I intended to send the report, I stayed late at the office to finalize the documents. As I was printing the last pages, Richard appeared in the doorway of the small copy room. Working late, he asked, his tone falsely casual. Just finishing up some documents, I replied, trying to gather the papers discreetly. Those look interesting, he said, moving closer. What case is that for? Before I could stop him, he picked up one of the pages, and his expression darkened as he scanned its contents. The Titan Tech merger patent disclosures. His voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly do you think you're doing, Elena? The confrontation that followed would lead directly to my termination, but also set the stage for my unexpected comeback using Richard's own legal weapon against him. I can explain, I said, trying to remain calm as Richard's face reddened with anger. Please do, he replied, his voice deceptively soft as he gathered up all the pages of my report. Explain why you're preparing an unauthorized report on a case you were specifically instructed not to investigate further. I found evidence that material information about Quantum's patent challenges is being deliberately obscured in the disclosure documents, I said, deciding that honesty was my only option now. As counsel to Titan Tech, our firm has an ethical obligation to ensure they have all relevant information before completing this acquisition. Richard's laugh was cold and dismissive. Now you're an expert on legal ethics. A paralegal with barely 2 years of experience is going to lecture me about my ethical obligations to clients. The facts are clear, I insisted. The patent challenge could invalidate their primary intellectual property asset. The current disclosure language technically includes this information but phrases it in a way that's practically indecipherable. Because the risk is minimal and has been appropriately contextualized for the client, Richard snapped. This is exactly why paralegals don't make strategic decisions. You lack the experience and judgment to understand the bigger picture. What bigger picture justifies hiding information that could affect a $2 billion transaction? I challenged my own anger, starting to override my caution. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let me be perfectly clear. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This merger has implications far beyond what your limited perspective can comprehend. By going behind my back, you're not only insubordinate but potentially damaging to our client's interests. I was planning to submit this to Marcus and the senior partners, not externally, I clarified. If the risk is truly minimal as you claim, then surely they would agree with your assessment. Something flashed in Richard's eyes, and I realized I had struck a nerve. He hadn't informed the other partners of the patent issues either. That's enough, he said, gathering all the papers from my report. You've overstepped for the last time. You're fired effective immediately. Clear out your desk now. Security will escort you out of the building. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Despite the tension of recent months, I hadn't truly believed he would fire me outright. You can't fire me for bringing up a legitimate ethical concern, I protested, my voice shaking slightly. That's retaliation against a whistleblower. I'm firing you for insubordination, poor performance, and violating firm protocol. Richard countered smoothly. All of which have been documented over the past several months, as Stephanie can attest to. There's no whistleblower protection for a paranoid paralegal creating problems where none exist. He pulled out his phone and called security, then Stephanie. Within minutes, 2 security guards and the HR director had arrived at the copy room. Miss Davis, please escort Elena to her desk to collect her personal belongings, then have security walk her out. Richard instructed. And make sure she doesn't take any firm documents with her. This is wrongful termination, I said, looking directly at Stephanie. And I believe it violates state whistleblower protection laws. Stephanie's expression remained impassive. We can discuss your concerns through proper channels after your departure. For now, please comply with the request to gather your things. The walk to my desk was humiliating. It was nearly 9 o'clock, but several attorneys and staff were still working, and all eyes followed our small procession through the office. I could feel the mix of curiosity, pity, and relief that it wasn't them being marched out. As I mechanically packed my few personal items into a box, Richard stood nearby, watching with undisguised satisfaction. One more thing, he said as I finished. Remember that NDA you signed. It remains in full effect after your termination. If you speak to anyone about firm business, client matters, or the circumstances of your departure, we will pursue all available legal remedies. And trust me when I say that no law firm in this city will hire you after I'm done. The threat was explicit now, no longer veiled in professional language. Richard was telling me plainly that he would destroy my career if I spoke up. Are we clear? He asked. I nodded silently, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down. Good, he said with a cold smile. I suggest a career change. Legal work clearly isn't suited to your temperament. The security guards escorted me to the elevator and then through the lobby to the street. It was raining, a cold September downpour that matched my mood perfectly. I stood there for a moment, clutching my box of belongings, watching as the lights of the city blurred through my tears. The drive home was a blur. I alternated between sobbing and sitting in numb silence as I navigated through the rainy Chicago streets. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt hollowed out, empty of everything except a dull, throbbing ache. I placed the box of desk items on my kitchen counter and collapsed onto my couch, staring at the ceiling. My career, which I had worked so hard to build, seemed to be in ruins. Who would hire me after being fired from Maxwell and Associates? And with Richard actively working against me, my prospects seemed even bleaker. Around midnight, after hours of cycling through shock, grief, and anger, something inside me shifted. The paralegal in me, the part that loved research and finding solutions in dense legal language, began to wake up. I remembered paragraph 12B of the NDA, the indemnity clause I had noticed earlier. I went to my home office and pulled out the copy of the NDA I had saved. For the next 3 hours, I read and reread the document, focusing particularly on paragraph 12B and related sections. I cross-referenced language with legal databases I still had access to through my alumni account at Northwestern. As the first light of dawn broke through my window, I sat back in my chair with a growing sense of amazement. The indemnity clause was unusual in its wording, broader than standard provisions. It created mutual protection that could potentially shield me from exactly the kind of threats Richard had made. The NDA, the very document Richard had used to threaten me, might actually be my salvation. The weapon he thought would silence me forever contained a critical flaw that I could potentially use to my advantage. For the first time since being escorted from the building, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Richard had made a crucial mistake in assuming I wouldn't thoroughly examine the legal document he was using against me. It was time to turn the tables. Over the next week, I dedicated myself to researching everything related to NDA's whistleblower protections, and specifically indemnity clauses like paragraph 12B. I pulled legal precedents, law review articles, and case studies that might be relevant to my situation. The more I researched, the more confident I became that the NDA could actually protect me rather than silence me. Paragraph 12B stated that the indemnity was mutual in cases where disclosure was necessary to prevent substantial and specific danger to public health or safety, or where concealment would constitute participation in unethical conduct, as defined by applicable professional codes. Most importantly, the clause specifically mentioned that this mutual indemnity survived termination of employment and applied even in cases where the employer claimed the disclosure was unfounded, provided the employee had reasonable basis to believe the disclosure was warranted. It was unusually strong language, likely included because the firm dealt with cases involving public corporations where securities laws created additional disclosure obligations. Whatever the reason, it was potentially my lifeline. I contacted Darren again, this time bringing the actual NDA with me to our meeting. "This is fascinating," he said after reviewing the document carefully. Paragraph 12B essentially creates a safe harbor for you to report ethical concerns, both within the firm and, if necessary, to appropriate regulatory bodies. So, Richard can't use the NDA to prevent me from speaking up about the patent disclosure issues, I asked. Not only that, Darren replied, looking increasingly excited as he reread the clause, but there's language here that could make him and the firm liable if they attempt to retaliate against you for bringing up legitimate ethical concerns. This is much stronger than standard whistleblower protection. What's my next step? I asked. You need to consult with a specialized employment attorney, Darren advised. This goes beyond my expertise. You need someone who specializes in whistleblower cases and has experience going up against major law firms. He referred me to Patricia Winters, one of the top employment attorneys in Chicago, known for representing employees in disputes with powerful employers. Her retainer wasn't cheap, but I used most of my savings to secure her services, believing it would be worth it. After reviewing my case, Patricia was cautiously optimistic. The language in paragraph 12B gives us significant leverage, she agreed. But we need to be strategic about how we use it. Richard Maxwell is clearly vindictive and won't back down easily. Together we developed a plan. The first step was to request an exit interview with HR to discuss my termination. This was standard procedure that had been bypassed due to the abrupt nature of my firing. Stephanie reluctantly agreed to meet with me the following Monday. What neither Stephanie nor Richard knew was that I had requested Jackson Wilson, the company's general counsel, to be present at the meeting as well. My email to him had been carefully worded, suggesting that there were significant legal implications regarding my termination that directly involved the firm's liability. Curiosity, if nothing else, would likely bring him to the table. The weekend before the meeting, I barely slept. I kept going over our strategy, rehearsing what I would say and trying to anticipate their reactions. Patricia had offered to accompany me, but we decided her presence might put them immediately on the defensive. This first meeting was about creating leverage, not initiating legal proceedings. Monday morning arrived, and I dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit with a simple white blouse. I wanted to project confidence and competence, not hostility or vindictiveness. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when I walked in, clearly surprised to see me back in the office after my dramatic exit. I was escorted to one of the smaller conference rooms, where Stephanie was already waiting. To my satisfaction, Jackson Wilson was there as well, looking curious and slightly concerned. Richard arrived last, his face darkening when he saw me. "What is this about?" he demanded, addressing Stephanie rather than me. "I thought this was a standard exit interview." "That's my understanding as well," Stephanie replied, looking uncomfortable. Elena requested the meeting to discuss her departure. There's nothing to discuss, Richard said dismissively. She was terminated for cause. The matter is closed. Actually, I said, speaking up for the first time, there are several matters that need to be addressed regarding my termination and the events leading up to it. I opened my portfolio and removed 3 copies of a document I had prepared, passing one to each of them. This outlines the ethical concerns I identified regarding the Titan Tech merger, specifically the inadequate disclosure of patent challenges facing quantum solutions. Richard started to interrupt, but I continued calmly. It also details the retaliatory actions taken against me after I attempted to bring these concerns to the attention of senior partners, culminating in my termination. This is absurd, Richard scoffed. You were fired for insubordination and poor performance, not for raising concerns. That brings me to the most important point, I said, maintaining my composure. As you've repeatedly reminded me, I signed an NDA when I joined the firm. You specifically threatened to use this NDA against me if I spoke about firm business after my termination. I removed another document from my portfolio, the NDA, with paragraph 12B highlighted. However, paragraph 12B of that same NDA contains an indemnity clause that specifically protects employees who raise ethical concerns from retaliation. I slid the NDA across the table toward Jackson, who picked it up with a furrowed brow. I'd like to direct your attention to the highlighted section, I said. The room fell silent as Jackson read the clause. His expression changed from mild curiosity to serious concern. He read it again more carefully this time. Richard, impatient with the silence, reached for the document. Let me see that. This is our standard NDA, Richard said after scanning it quickly. What's your point? My point, I replied, is that paragraph 12B creates mutual indemnity that protects whistleblowers from exactly the kind of threats you made against me. It specifically survives termination and applies even in cases where the employer disagrees with the employee's concerns, provided the employee had reasonable basis for those concerns. Richard laughed, though it sounded forced. You're misinterpreting a standard legal clause. This doesn't give you license to violate confidentiality. Jackson, however, was rereading the clause with growing alarm. Richard, he said quietly, I need to speak with you privately for a moment. There's no need, Richard dismissed. This is a desperate attempt by a former employee to create problems where none exist. Richard Jackson insisted, his voice firmer. Now. Something in Jackson's tone finally got through to Richard. The 2 men stepped outside, leaving me alone with Stephanie, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Elena, she began awkwardly. I hope you understand that the firm has policies and procedures that must be followed. I understand completely, I replied, which is why I'm following the procedure outlined in paragraph 12B for reporting ethical concerns and addressing retaliatory termination. Before Stephanie could respond, the door opened, and Jackson returned alone. His face was grim. Miss Davis, would you excuse us? He asked. I need to speak with Elena privately. Once Stephanie had left, Jackson sat down across from me with a sigh. Richard Island, consulting with outside counsel, he said carefully. Your interpretation of paragraph 12B has raised some concerns that we need to evaluate. It's not just my interpretation, I replied. I've consulted with legal experts who specialize in employment law and whistleblower protections. They agree that the language in this clause is unusually broad and creates significant protection for employees raising ethical concerns. Jackson nodded slowly. I won't dispute that at this time. What I want to know is what you're seeking from this meeting. This was the critical moment Patricia and I had prepared for. First, I want my termination reclassified as a resignation with a neutral reference for future employment, I said. Second, I want my ethical concerns about the Titan Tech merger to be properly investigated by the senior partners. And third, I want assurance that Richard will not interfere with my future employment opportunities. Those are significant requests, Jackson noted. They're reasonable given the circumstances I countered, especially considering that if this situation were to become public, the potential damage to the firm's reputation would be substantial. Jackson studied me for a long moment. You're not recording this conversation, are you? No, I assured him. I'm not interested in damaging the firm. I just want to protect my career and ensure our client isn't misled in a major transaction. He nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to discuss this with the senior partners. In the meantime, I suggest we adjourn this meeting. Of course, I agreed. My attorney has prepared a more detailed document outlining my concerns and requests. I'd be happy to have her send it over this afternoon. Jackson's eyebrows rose. You've retained counsel. Patricia Winters, I confirmed, watching his expression shift to one of grudging respect. Patricia's reputation clearly preceded her. I see, he said. That certainly clarifies the seriousness of your position. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. As I left the firm that day, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and triumph. I had stood my ground and, more importantly, had watched the power dynamic shift dramatically when Jackson realized the implications of paragraph 12B. The NDA that was supposed to silence me had become my shield and potentially my sword. Richard had made a critical error in assuming I would be too intimidated or naive to thoroughly examine the legal document he was using to threaten me. Now that error might cost him far more than he could have anticipated. The next step would depend on the firm's response, but for the first time since my termination, I felt like I had regained some control over the situation. The tables were turning, and Richard was about to learn that underestimating me had been a serious mistake. True to his word, Jackson contacted me within 48 hours, requesting a meeting at a neutral location, a private room at an upscale restaurant downtown. This time I brought Patricia with me. When we arrived, I was surprised to find not only Jackson but also Marcus Johnson and 2 other senior partners waiting for us. Richard was conspicuously absent. Thank you for coming, Marcus began after introductions were made. We've reviewed your concerns and the relevant documentation, including paragraph 12B of the NDA. After careful consideration, we believe there is merit to your position. Patricia nodded appreciatively, but remained silent, allowing them to continue. As a first step, Marcus continued, we're prepared to reclassify your departure as a resignation rather than a termination with a positive reference for future employment. We can also offer an enhanced severance package of 6 months' salary. And what about the ethical concerns regarding the Titan Tech merger, I asked. The partners exchanged uncomfortable glances before Jackson responded. We've initiated an internal review of the disclosure documents related to the patent challenges. Preliminary findings suggest there may indeed have been inadequate transparency in how the information was presented. In other words, Patricia interjected, Elena was right. We're still investigating, Jackson said cautiously, but yes, it appears the concerns she raised had merit. And what actions are being taken to correct this? Patricia pressed. Marcus cleared his throat. We've already scheduled a meeting with Titan Tech to provide additional information regarding the patent challenges. We're committed to full transparency with our client. That's a positive step, Patricia acknowledged. However, we believe the firm's liability extends beyond simply correcting the disclosure issue. Elena experienced significant retaliation for attempting to raise legitimate ethical concerns, culminating in her termination. This appears to be a clear violation of the mutual indemnity provision in paragraph 12B. What exactly are you proposing? Jackson asked. Patricia outlined our position: full severance for 1 year, a significant financial settlement for the retaliatory termination, a clear written statement that I had acted ethically and appropriately, and a binding agreement that no one at the firm would interfere with my future employment opportunities. The negotiations continued for nearly 3 hours, with proposals and counterproposals flowing back and forth. Throughout the discussion, I noticed the senior partners becoming increasingly concerned as more details about Richard's handling of the situation emerged. There's one more thing you should know, I said during a pause in the negotiations. I've discovered additional documentation suggesting Richard was personally aware of the patent challenge issues from the beginning and deliberately chose to minimize them in the disclosure documents. The room fell silent. This was new information even to Patricia. What kind of documentation? Marcus asked carefully. Email exchanges between Richard and the CFO at Quantum Solutions, discussing the patent challenge explicitly, I replied. The conversation makes it clear they both understood the significance of the issue and discussed ways to present it that would be less likely to raise red flags during due diligence. How did you obtain these emails? Jackson asked sharply. They were included in the document bundle I was reviewing before my termination, I explained. I made copies as part of my ethical obligation to document potential misconduct affecting our client. The senior partners excused themselves for a private discussion. When they returned 30 minutes later, their demeanor had changed significantly. We need to expand our internal investigation, Marcus announced. In the meantime, we'd like to propose a revised settlement. The new offer exceeded our original demands: 18 months of severance, a substantial financial settlement, a letter of recommendation from Marcus personally, and a non-disparagement agreement binding all parties. In exchange, I would provide all documentation related to the patent disclosure issues and agree not to discuss the matter publicly. After consulting privately with Patricia, I accepted the offer. The agreement was drafted on the spot and signed by all parties. As we prepared to leave, Marcus asked to speak with me privately for a moment. "I want to apologize," he said once we were alone. "I should have been more attentive to what was happening. Richard has always been difficult, but I never imagined he would go to these lengths." "What will happen with the Titan Tech merger?" I asked. "We're presenting all the information about the patent challenges to them tomorrow," he replied. "They may still proceed with the acquisition, but with a significantly reduced valuation to account for the risk." As for Richard, he hesitated before continuing. "Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending the conclusion of our investigation. The evidence you provided about his direct knowledge of the patent issues island, troubling to say the least. What Marcus didn't say, but what I would learn in the coming weeks, was that the situation was far worse for Richard than he had implied. The day after our settlement, the firm presented the complete information about the patent challenges to Titan Tech. The client was furious about the previously obscured risks. Titan Tech's CEO demanded a meeting with the firm's full executive committee, during which he threatened to pull all of their business worth millions in annual billings. He also raised the possibility of filing a formal complaint with the State Bar Association regarding the inadequate disclosures. Faced with the potential loss of a major client and possible ethical violations, the firm launched a comprehensive investigation into Richard's handling of the case. What they found went beyond the patent disclosure issues. There was evidence of similar behavior in other cases, along with expense account irregularities and instances where Richard had misrepresented his actions to both clients and partners. 2 weeks after our settlement, Richard was officially terminated. The firm issued a statement citing violations of firm policies and professional standards without providing specific details. The fallout continued. Several other clients, hearing rumors about ethical issues, began questioning their own dealings with Richard. 3 major clients ultimately moved their business to competing firms, creating a significant financial hit to Maxwell and Associates. The firm's reputation, once sterling, was now tarnished. Legal industry publications ran articles speculating about the reasons for Richard's abrupt departure, and competitors used the uncertainty to poach both clients and talented attorneys. Meanwhile, my own professional situation improved dramatically. With Marcus's glowing recommendation and the substantial settlement providing financial security, I had the freedom to be selective about my next position. Several boutique firms expressed interest, attracted by my reputation for ethical conduct and attention to detail. Ultimately, I decided to accept a position at a mid-sized firm known for its progressive workplace culture and commitment to ethical practice. The role came with greater responsibility and a salary exceeding what I had earned at Maxwell and Associates. The final piece of satisfaction came 3 months after my settlement, when I learned that Richard had been struggling to find equivalent employment. His reputation had been so damaged by the investigation findings that major firms were unwilling to take the risk of bringing him on. He eventually accepted a position at a small practice handling routine corporate matters, a dramatic step down from his former prominence. The NDA that Richard had used to threaten me had indeed become the instrument of his downfall. Paragraph 12b. The mutual indemnity clause he had never expected me to understand or invoke had been the key to turning the tables and achieving justice. As for Maxwell and Associates, the firm survived but was significantly diminished. They lost several key partners to competitors and had to merge with another firm to remain viable. The name Maxwell was quietly removed from the letterhead in the merger, erasing Richard's legacy completely. My victory wasn't just about personal vindication, though that was certainly sweet. It was about standing up for ethical principles in a profession where they should be paramount. It was about refusing to be silenced by intimidation and threats. And most importantly, it was about using knowledge, persistence, and courage to fight back against abuse of power. The experience transformed me professionally and personally in ways I never could have anticipated when I first signed that NDA as a hopeful new paralegal starting her career. In the months that followed my settlement and Richard's downfall, I experienced a wide range of emotions. Initially, there was the pure satisfaction of vindication, the knowledge that my concerns had been proven valid and that Richard had faced consequences for his actions. That feeling was sweet. I won't deny it. But as time passed, other emotions emerged. There was lingering anger about the unnecessary stress and fear I had endured. There was sadness about colleagues at Maxwell and Associates who lost their jobs when the firm downsized following the loss of major clients. And occasionally there was even a flicker of guilt, wondering if I could have handled things differently. Gradually, though, these complex feelings gave way to something more balanced and constructive. I began to see the entire experience as a profound learning opportunity, both professionally and personally. Professionally, the aftermath opened doors I hadn't anticipated. After 6 months at the mid-sized firm, I received a surprising offer from one of Maxwell's former clients who had been impressed by my ethical stand. They wanted me to join their in-house legal team at a significantly higher salary. The role would allow me to help shape their compliance policies and ethical guidelines, using my experience to prevent similar situations. I accepted the position and found it deeply fulfilling to help build systems that encouraged ethical behavior rather than punishing whistleblowers. My experience gave me credibility when advocating for strong protections for employees who raised concerns. On a personal level, the journey of standing up to Richard taught me about my own resilience and courage. Before this experience, I'm not sure I would have believed I had the strength to challenge someone as powerful and intimidating as Richard. Now I knew better. The settlement money provided unexpected freedom as well. I used part of it to finally apply to law school, attending evening classes while working my new job. After years of helping attorneys, I was on my path to becoming one myself, with a particular interest in employment law and ethical compliance. Perhaps the most meaningful development came 6 months after starting my new job, when I reconnected with Amelia from Maxwell and Associates. She had left shortly after the firm's troubles began and was now at another corporate firm. "You're something of a legend, you know," she told me over coffee. The paralegal who brought down Richard Maxwell by using his own NDA against him. "I didn't set out to bring anyone down," I clarified. "I just wanted to do the right thing for our client and protect my career." "Well, you did both," Amelia said with a smile, "and you inspired others. After you left and the truth started coming out, other employees began speaking up about problems they had witnessed. It was like a dam breaking." I learned from Amelia that several other paralegals and junior associates had come forward with their own stories about Richard's unethical behavior once the firm's investigation began. People who had remained silent for years out of fear finally felt empowered to speak up. This ripple effect was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. The culture of silence that had protected Richard for so long had been broken not just at Maxwell and Associates, but potentially at other firms where similar dynamics existed. As for Richard himself, I heard through the legal community grapevine that he was struggling at his new, less prestigious position. His ego had taken a massive hit, and he had difficulty adjusting to his diminished status. There were rumors he was drinking heavily and alienating colleagues with his bitter attitude. I took no pleasure in his personal struggles, but I did feel that justice had been served professionally. Maxwell and Associates never fully recovered from the scandal. The merger with another firm effectively erased their identity, and many of the original partners moved on to other opportunities. The office building where I had once worked now housed a different law firm entirely, as if Maxwell and Associates had never existed. Looking back, I realized that my journey contained lessons that might help others facing similar situations. First, knowledge truly is power. Had I not taken the time to thoroughly read and understand the NDA, particularly paragraph 12b, I would have remained intimidated by Richard's threats. Understanding the legal protections available to me was the crucial first step in standing up for myself. Second, documentation is essential. Without the evidence I had preserved about both the patent disclosure issues and Richard's retaliatory actions, it would have been much harder to prove my case. In situations involving potential misconduct, contemporaneous documentation can make all the difference. Third, seeking expert help was critical. I couldn't have navigated the complex legal issues alone despite my paralegal training. Patricia's expertise and reputation gave me leverage I wouldn't otherwise have had. Investing in proper legal representation was one of the best decisions I made. Fourth, ethical standards exist for a reason, and violations often indicate deeper problems. Richard's willingness to obscure information from clients wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment, but part of a pattern of misconduct that extended to other aspects of his professional life. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing rarely benefits anyone except the wrongdoer. By speaking up, I not only protected myself but also helped prevent harm to clients and created space for others to share their experiences. The NDA that Richard waved in my face as a threat became the very tool that enabled my victory. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the weapons others use to intimidate us contain the seeds of their own defeat, if only we have the courage and knowledge to recognize them. Today, as I continue my legal studies and build my new career, I carry these lessons with me. The experience changed me, making me more confident in standing up for what's right, but also more thoughtful about how systems can either enable or prevent ethical misconduct. For anyone facing a similar situation, wondering whether to speak up about wrongdoing in the workplace, I would say this: understand your rights document. Everything, seek expert advice, and find the courage to stand up for what's right. The path won't be easy, but the alternative, allowing unethical behavior to continue unchecked, carries its own heavy cost. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who was abusing their power? What helped you find the courage to speak up? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found my story inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe for more true stories about standing up for what's right in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the very documents meant to silence us contain the keys to our freedom.